G'day, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on blunders in the World Chess Championship Candidates tournaments. Today we've moved along to the tournament in 1962 in Curacao, won by Petrosion, who then went on to win the World Championship against Botvinnik. And this is another one of those massive, many players, many rounds. So you have many games and you have many blunders, or I think this is pretty high standard tournament, actually. Some blunders and a lot of endgame inaccuracies, which I really find fascinating, looking at almost the minutiae of what some of these players are doing wrong in the endgames as well. Just a really good learning experience. Obviously, these players are very high standard, and these mistakes really show you some of the cutting edge things you need to know about endgames. Right, okay, so let's quickly go to the capture screen. There we go. See that? So it was, this is the World Championship sort of thing. There's Botvinnik and Petrosion. And you have the zonals. Interestingly, the zonal for the USSR was their championship in early 1961. And you see who qualified: Petrosian, Korchnoi, Geller, Stein. We'll have a quick look at him. I mean, obviously very famous players who missed out: Smyslov, Bronstein, Spassky, Averbach, Taimanov, Boleslavsky. So a whole list of the sort of famed players. So very difficult to get in. I mean, Spassky had been in candidates before. Obviously, will come back next time. I think he'll win the next two candidates. And then went to the interzonals, and then Fischer won the interzonal. And Geller, Petrosian, Korchnoi, Filip as well. And you have 6 places, and then you have the final 2 spots from last time, Tal and Keres. What I would look at it was Leonard Stein. If you have a look at it, he came 6th to 8th, and then he won the playoff. But of course, because he's Russian and they had this limit on the number of players, he didn't get in. And that's sorry about him. He died very young, actually. Leonard Stein, very strong player. And he just missed out a couple of times on getting into the candidates. So I thought that was quite interesting. I mean, you can read these Wikipedia pages at your leisure. Okay, get that out of the way. And here we have the capture screen. A bit off-centered. So that's the rolling scores. And you can see, I mean, three players basically in it, almost all the way through: Petrosian, Keres, and Geller. And it's quite interesting. Keres, I think he lost an important game against Benko. I mean, I'm not looking at the important or deciding games in the tournament. Maybe that's another video series people could consider. Anyway, Petrosian just nicked it against both of those 2 other players. I mean, this is following the last tournament. This one, Keres is really coming second many times, just missing out many times. So that's why I'll consider the best player never to have won the World Championship. I mean, technically he did get a shot at it in 48. So that's the profile, and then the dots indicate blunders. So there's plenty of blunders. I might go through all of them. But just let's have a look at this. A lot of these numbers aren't going to mean much. Here's some of the games we're going to look at with the blunders and the move number. But I found it quite interesting. Do we think blunders had much of an impact on this tournament? Not especially. You can see blunders by players. The first blunder, you'll see there are many more blunders. There are often sort of repeated blunders in some games, but Filip-Benko, Korchnoi-Tal, Keres, and Geller. So according to that, Petrosian, neither Petrosian nor Fischer made the first blunder in the game, which is quite interesting. And then the gifts of the player, I guess. So this is sort of, Petrosian was much more solid than the other 2. That's one thing. He didn't blunder, so obviously that's to his benefit. And he also got a few more blunders in his favour than, say, Keres did. And the idea of that sort of score count, and that's just the rolling score through time. So it was quite funny. Not funny, but it was pointing out the fact that Filip only just beat Tal's score, even though Tal withdrew after actually ended up in hospital. That's quite famous picture of him with Fischer. So they kept the scores, Tal's scores, in there. Didn't really seem to have much of an impact, because if we go back to, sorry, I'm meandering a bit here, just trying to work out the page I want to look at. Yeah, you can see this Tal scores, right? And you can see, if you look at his scores against top page, it's all 2.5 against those top 3 players. So you wouldn't say he had an impact on the outcome of the tournament, his ill health. Okay, and of course the tournament famous for Fischer came out a month or 2 later saying they all cheated, all that sort of stuff, right? I think I can agree that this sort of draw patch here, so they obviously wanted short, easy draws so that they could save their energy. So I kind of accepted. People throwing games is not so accepted. I think one thing which would be fairly clear about this is that Fischer, this wasn't the World Championship level Fischer at this stage. But anyway, at a tournament with an amazing set of players. To become World Champion could have been very strong player. future world champion, played 2 or 3 matches depending on the way you count it. Tal, previous world champion. So yeah, just a amazingly strong lineup. Okay, so let's get rid of that again. And what I'm going to do is, let me count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm going to go through 8 games. I've been a bit more strict on my screening than last time, which went on for quite some time. And a few of these are very interesting endgames. You see this position here, which is actually pretty important in some ways. It's Petrosian-Tal in the first round. Tal blundered. Well, Petrosian also blundered. You can see the repeated blunders here. And Petrosian won this game. Well, there's an extra sort of, maybe that's an extra half point that helps him. And that extra half point is what he won on the tournament by. And this is round 1. So you can see that, you could argue when the tournament's so tight that these endgame inaccuracies by one player or another can actually have a pretty important impact. And I think one of those games is very interesting. I've carved out, I'll do a whole video on it. Geller-Benko, queen and pawn versus queen and pawn endgame in the last round, which is pretty interesting. Okay, so let's have a look at this game. This is a rook endgame, 5 versus 3. I think that's you'd think you should gradually end up with a pass pawn somewhere or a 2 pawns left to none, and as long as it's not going to be the F and the H pawn, should be winning. Right, so this is, if you look at the sort of game profile, this is the first where Petrosian's got this really big advantage. His next move is blunder, throws away the win. Unfortunately, Tal didn't really take advantage of it, so he played h5, and h5 proves to be a weak pawn, which black can take advantage of, effectively win that pawn. Possibly we'll go into that, and should have been drawn after this. What white should have played, Petrosian should have played g4. So let's just go through the line of how g4 could win this position, give you a good idea. We'll just see these repeated themes about how to crystallize your advantage, and in Tal's case, how he could have simplified to a drawn endgame. Okay, so that's got to be taken. Take it with the rook. I mean, this rook's in a good position targeting that pawn, so the king's restricted at the moment. Okay, so let's keep going, right? Just keep the rook in that position. Okay, white needs to free his king, and you can notice that we're not advantaging the h pawn at this stage. Having done that, well, actually, the engine's doing different things here. Let's see how this continues. Check, check. Okay, that didn't really help. I'm sorry about that. Okay, this is what I'm saying. So advance the king. Now you go back to that. I'm rushing through this a bit, but obviously advance the king. So we've got to block the king out. So now that covers all the squares, but now here's a weak pawn to attack. So let's see what white's next strategy is to bring the rook across, attack the weak pawn. Okay. This sort of interesting way of doing it, but now that's released the white king, and you can obviously get started with another weak pawn here, obviously, because had to move now. What are you going to do in this position? If you take h pawn, it'll be 3 versus 1 with a cut off black king. That's obviously going to be winning for white, so we have to go defensive. And you can see just that's the idea, right? So now this is going to be fairly easily winning. Let's see what the next few moves suggested are. Black king can't actually get back and defend, although white lets him through. But you can imagine that now the white king will advance and we'll end up with 2 kind of central pawns. That is what white should have done. We go all the way back to this position here. However, h5 is premature, because now that h pawn is weak, and in a lot of lines it drops. For now, black just same strategy. And now g4, so this is exactly what we looked at last time, but what's the difference? You don't take it. If you take it, I think you transpose into some of those lines we just looked at. You advance king. So this is a game continuation. Tal is doing well, so the white rook has to move. Rook g8. And now this is, if you look at this is this little bobble here. But there's an easy draw here, which Tal did not take. Let's have a look. Tal should have taken the g pawn off. Rook has to take back with king. Now, although our king is cut off, I think our king will get back, and you can see this is a 3 versus 2, which should be drawn, right? Obviously 3 versus 2 versus that 3 versus 1 we ended up with last time. Okay, so Tal did not do that, and maybe there's all sorts of reasons why some of these blunders maybe had time trouble or whatever. So he decided to knock the rook away first. Now, see, this is a momentary blunder because the right move was not played. Now, I found this very interesting. The winning strategy, we'll come back to what was played. The winning strategy, only one winning move, rook to d8. Now let's have a look. He played rook e8. What's rook d8? What's the difference? Got to take that, not much choice. We just hold our f-pawn. I think that's pretty important. So what is it? We're still 4 versus 3. King move, d5. The d5 break, that was the only move. He takes d. And you can there's a few lines here you might want to look at more carefully. If you take it and we take back, we're holding our h-pawn. G-pawn's going to drop. It's going to be 3 versus 1 again. So, and if you don't take it, take this pawn here, and the winning move is d6 line, because let's say black gets behind it, d7, and there's going to be those terrible checks, and the black king has no hiding spot. So I found this advance of the d-pawn. The only way of winning, so you move your rook across and you advance the d-pawn. There's another way you might consider doing it. You might say, what about rook d2 in this case? But the same thing. Just push the pawn anyway. Can't take the h-pawn. And, you know, to avoid those nasty checks, you're going to have to drop back to h7, for instance. d7, f5. So you can see all that's happening. We need the rook there, but the rook's also pressuring there, so that stopped us from taking that pawn. So we played that move to protect the g-pawn, but now h6. Now what is black going to do? Can't take the pawn, and the thing is that locks his king down. We're going to lose pressure on rook. Can't move from d-file, so we'll just, let's say we go there, and it's actually suggesting d5 to stop the king from advancing through, but we can come in this way. And I'm not quite too sure what we expect to happen here. King marches in, can't take the pawn. We just pick up all the pawns, and that will be a winning endgame. Right, okay, so what was this? So rook d8 won. Rook e8 does not win, and why does rook e8 not win? Continuation which Tal played. Check. Take g3. If we take the g-pawn, we lose our f-pawn, right? So we need to hold like that. And then we come to this next spike back up. It's so interesting, all intricacies here. Now, king h6 was played, which was a blunder. Should have been played was king to g7. So let's see what the drawing line here was. We're saving a tempo holding our f7 pawn, which seems to be the main point. So if we now go rook d8 on continuation, you can see that that simply ends up with a defendable position, 2 versus 1, but it's defendable. Another way of doing it is, well, king takes g4 this point without moving the rook first. It's defendable. And then rook e7. Okay, so it was kind of like some sort of pin on the f-pawn. Then, actually, this is quite interesting, so that now the white rook doesn't have enough control, so we can run around, pick up the h-pawn, and we end up with that 3 versus 2 again. So that's pretty clever, all those lines. So you look at this, all these sort of only moves. King to g7 draws. King to h6 has played. Mistake. See that Petrosian actually keeps his advantage for a while now with correct moves. Only move to win. Rook to e7. Pressure the f-pawn. King got drop back. So the difference is that now it's white to move and not black to move. White moves his rook away, and black has to just hold station on the second rank. Rook to c5. So we're now holding our h-pawn. Move the king up. d5. Could take it, but you can see that he takes d5. Rook takes d5. We can do that line. Code that line up as well. If we take, rook takes back, then okay. So this pawn drops, and it's 3 versus 1. Once again, the winning position. King g5 similar. h6 is not the best move. Once again, just looking at the sort of things you can do, you can simplify here. So what should white have done here? More clear. Check. So it seemed odd with the king g5 doing that. So king has to come back. That pawn off, take that pawn off, and then we can just take that pawn straight away, and you got a e and a h pawn, which is winning. Or I think you could also round it up with rook across. h6 wasn't the best. I'm imagining sometime probably h6 wasn't the best, but now kind of transposed back into one of the lines we had before. Right, now here we are in the key final sort of blunder by Petrosian. This big drop from about plus 500 to 0, and key is that h7 wins. And let's have a look at why h7 wins. Wasn't played, right? Got to get behind it, and you want to move to get behind it. Okay, now you want winning move if you can find it. I think that you can obviously get this game on the internet very easily, and just have a look at what are all the strategies here. If you go rook takes g5 check, we just drop back. We'll lose our g pawn. This pawn will drop, and it'll be what we'll be left with. Let me see if I can find a different color. It'll be that 2 versus 1 position, right? So we've got to avoid that 2 versus 1 position, and the way to do it is you bounce your rook around the corners, and okay, f5's played. You end up with his rook stuck at the back. You can never drop back with the king and exchange off because your pawns will get picked off by the white king at the same stage. Okay, all good. Rook h2. What a nasty move. Not the only winning. Well, rook h2 is the only winning move. That's strange. You also send a h file, obviously. Can't go to that square or that square or that square. What's wrong with this? I didn't code this up. d4. Got problems. You can't take it because we'll push our pawn there and the rook will drop. So obviously that doesn't work. So we go back here. Rook to h2, and it's basically zigzag. That's a problem. Black has to back off with his king. Actually, didn't even do it in this. But for instance, back off with the king. Variation. Advance our king. Still zigzag. King g6. Rook h4. Zigzag. King f6. Check the king away. King g7. King g5. And you can see that white will be winning the pawn endgame, which ends up all the way to the end. Actually, the line the computer gave was actually just push the pawn, and it takes check. And this looks pretty good. We've made a barrier, but we just play moves like that, and it might take a long time, but we are getting out, and we'll pick up the pawns. So there's this rook stuck in front of the pawn is terribly debilitating. All the way back here, rook takes d5, check. So we just went through h7 winning. So this rook takes g5 check, and then king g6 was played, and the game is over. However, there's a draw here. We've taken the pawn. Now we can't take this pawn back yet. So let's say we go to f5, attacking the f pawn and defending our f pawn. Looks all good. Kind of take this pawn at some stage. Before check. Oh, we got a 2-1. It's a 2 versus 1. This is going to be drawn, right? So basically, it's almost as soon as we take the h pawn and we can hold our f pawn, this will be a draw. But what did Tal do in this position? He dropped back to g6. Don't quite understand that move. White had the idea. This is game continuation. Rook g6 check. Moves the king up. h7. Now we have just transposed into this horrible position, and Tal resigned. Okay, I think I've spent way too long on that rook endgame, but you can see that there's all these little possibilities going on about like this structure here, totally winning for white, versus what pawn structures can you exchange down into and either be drawing or winning. Okay, so I hope I didn't spend too long on that. I really loved it. As I say, so that's Petrosian-Tal Round 1 of Curacao, 1962. So you can go and find that on the internet and delve into the minutiae like I have done. Okay, so I think that's probably the most time we'll spend on one game. Anyway, let's go now on to round 5, Filip versus Tal. Okay, there's the position. You can see it's quite tense in the center, quite a few major pieces around, and then knight takes e5 is a losing move. So maybe you want to have a look at the out position and see what you think you should do. Shouldn't take too long to realize there's a forced mate. Let's go through that. Played, obviously. So we are now threatening mate on g2, and then maybe Filip thought this check would bail him out. King in the corner, and that's where the game ended. What actually it suggests here is queen to d5, knight to f7 check is another one, and or a combination of those two ideas. And you'd think, okay, well now we're blocking the square, but unfortunately we have check on that square. Queen takes g3 check, and king to h1 check, g1 check, h2. Now you realize why we took away the pawn on g3, because that's a very pretty sort of checkmate. Right, so we go all the way back here. What was wrong with that knight takes e5 move? Rook takes e5 is the simple move you should have played. Rook takes e5. And all of that does not work because if you take the H pawn, then that is check. In fact, you are most likely going to get checkmated. Different sort of scenario. King to f7. You could also interpose with the bishop. Check, because we've got this covers squared. You cannot take the rook without getting checkmated. Okay, so that was a fairly simple little tactical error. I hope you found that a nice little sequence. Always nice to have a queen and knight acting together against the opponent's king. Now I'm going to go on to the next one, which is another endgame, actually. Fischer-Geller from round 9 at the moment. I think I lied. I might spend a bit of time looking at this one as well. It's a blunder by Fischer. I don't know. There should have been a blunder kind of one for Fischer on the earlier slide I was showing. Where would you move your king? 2 drawing moves. Fischer didn't find it. Let's have a look. This is just getting an idea of how would you play these rook games. Overview, black's has a pawn advantage, but you'd think white could hold. At the moment, the G pawn can't be taken because black's G pawn would then be taken. So, and you can see this one's also sort of blocking sort of ways of unwinding, untangling. Anyway, so let's have a look. So, move played was, I coded them all up. I wanted to understand why certain ones were drawing and others were not. So king f2 loses, which is what Fischer played. Let's just go through the game continuation first. Let's have a look at what happens. Only one winning move. See if you can find it. The rook to e5. So the dilemma here is that we can't move our rook because we want to make sure we could take the e pawn or the G pawn, depending upon what black does in terms of taking that pawn. Goes 2 different ways. So move your rook, then you've got a losing G and E pawn. Rook endgame. So king f3, and it's going to be king f3 or king f1, or if you move on the G file, you're going to be hit with a check. King f3, that was played. Rook f5, check. Okay, so if you go to the G file, then check when the pawn's taken. So you have to go to the E file. Okay, and now you see the problem, e5. So now the rook will protect the e pawn when the pawn is taken. The logical thing to do is rook to e4, take the G pawn off, and we've been able to organize it so that we have been able to take the G pawn without losing one of our pawns. And then now just a theoretical win, advance your king. Maybe Geller didn't know exactly how to win it. I'm assuming you just gradually advance your pawns. I mean, Fischer looks like Fischer fought onto the bitter end. Check. Oh, and we're going to end up with a standard Lucena position. Okay, right. So let's go back. So in this position, we now know why king f2 loses, because of the rook back to e5 and a bit of maneuvering. You'd have to calculate it out, and you've won the pawn. Okay, so why does king h1 also loses? I've got king h1 coded up, so let's have a look. King h1. Why does king h1 lose? Only one winning move again, and this time it is rook to e2. And your rook can't move, so you are now forced on to g1, which was a drawing move, but it's not a drawing move now, because if you get rook to g1 now, one winning move, most likely going to play, like just it's giving king h1, but maybe you get embarrassed if you come out to the f file. Take the pawn, king around, check, check. Get the pawn, and now that'll be winning. Okay, so what happens there is you get stuck in the back rank. So you don't want to go to the back rank on h1, but if we go to e1 straight away, drawing, like let's do the same line, rook e2, move that king around as in the previous line. We have the extra tempo to stop the black king from getting around the back. And then the other drawing line, just for completeness, is king to h2, which looks a bit weird, but you're not getting yourself stuck on the back rank. And then try this maneuver. What happens? Oh, I hold that way, right? So actually, it's more a case of king f2 didn't draw because of that particular tactic to pick up the pawn, and king h1 doesn't draw because you get stuck on the back rank, and that's really bad for you. Right, okay, so I didn't spend quite as long on that one, but just once again, I always find these little sort of positions you get to, like this, where what's the actual reasoning for different sort of edge cases, which one's a draw and which one's a loss. Anyway, so Fischer played f2. He lost that game. I mean, Fischer wasn't the later Fischer at this stage, so he's kind of mid-table obscurity, I guess, which kind of surprised somebody, because if you go back to the candidates, or more the interzonal beforehand, he actually won the interzonal comfortably, which actually had Geller, Petrosion and Korchnoi in it. Good. Right, so the next game we're going to look at is Korchnoi-Fischer from round 12. Okay, here we are. This is one of the gifts which Fischer got in this tournament. So Korchnoi has a comfortable advantage if you look at the profile, like up two pawns. Bishop c6, already a mistake. Fischer snapped it off, and now Rook c1. And obviously, white should just retake Rook c1. What is wrong with Rook to c1? Goes from +2 to -3. Only one move. But the problem is that the white queen is undefended, and the black queen is now defended by the knight. And if queens are off, the knight survives, and we're a piece up. And if you took the knight, lose your queen. And if you move your queen, then we move the knight. And that's how it continued. Oh, okay. So this was perhaps his thought, but actually there's nothing. b7. Oh, game continues. Quite some time, actually. Maybe white's relying on his b-pawn. Okay, he didn't need to be a piece down for this situation. Lost the e-pawn. Check. Oh, that's nice. Mating net now. It's kind of, game didn't continue, but a possible mate. So let me just do the variation. Possible mate is continuation, check. There we go, there's one mate. The other mate was advancing the pawns and checkmating white king in the corner. Okay, so that is just a simple tactical mistake, as is the next one. So next one is round 16, Filip versus Benko. Just let me get that up. Okay, you can see the chart there, just a blunder, 600-point blunder. Okay, that is quite interesting. This is a very tactical position. There's only one drawing move. What would you play in this position? Okay, what you should play is queen d7 check, and the continuation would be like this. Check with a rook on the back rank, and that's probably drawn. I mean, you're going to lose. A pawn is probably a perpetual check. Okay, so what white played was rook to c7 check. Now, what is the difference here? Only one sensible move, king h8. Notice that there's no checks now. The diagonal's covered. No checks at all. And if you don't recapture the rook, you're obviously going to be a rook down, so you capture the rook, this game continuation, and then the problem you have is that the black rook gets into play down the f file, and this square is not covered by anything, so white went to the middle of the board. Doesn't really help him. In many ways, winning this check. There's the rook is ombre. You just take the rook. Now there are some checks, but not many, I believe. There we go, and now that is the end of the game. So that was an unfortunate mistake by Filip. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which is another tactics one actually, a Geller-Filip in round 18. Okay, you can see the position there in the chart there. This was like quite early in the game. Filip made a mistake and just splat. Right, you can see actually there's still some bugging, I think. So there's no Geller bug there, but affecting some other things. Right, so many moves which black can play, many moves. He played bishop to d7, which is not one of the many moves he could play. It is now gone from 0 to +400, as you can see, according to the chart. What is the winning move for the Geller? Yep, it's knight d5, which is a fork. And unfortunately, the logical thing to do, take, check. There you go. That was the end of the game. And then king h8, rook off, and you end up in a position like this. It's the advantage of the exchange, which is centralized powerful position. Cannot be held. Yep, okay, that was pretty short and sweet, that one. Okay, the last game we're going to do today is Keres-Benko round 20. And this was another technical one. And you can see this is a spike. It was an error and then a compensating error, and in the end Keres won. I believe this was the one he won on time when Benko knocked over some pieces or whatever. So there's a story about that, and supposedly that made Benko really angry, so that in the last round he beat Keres. Okay, so regardless, here's a position, and Rook b7, everything, b7, bishop takes g3. So Keres is now winning this position, and he didn't win it. Queen f3, which is then losing. So this is the whole thing. Benko's bishop sack, sound or not. And I think the conclusion was it is unsound. Right, so you go from drawn position. Then if we play queen to f3, which was played in the game, right, we'll go back and cover these things. So black is now winning. You can see the winning line. What actually happened in the game? The bishop dropped back to d6. Benko's picked up the pawn. He's happy with life and ends up losing on time. However, position here, winning line is check. If you play up to g2, well, there's a couple of lines here. Let's go through them. Check. That's losing, obviously. So we'll go check. Interpose. Check. The queen. Check. Not looking good, is it? Bishop f2 is the most resilient. And queen takes 2. I'll take the bishop. There's b6, b5. Just not looking good. 4. Check. Rook can do that now. Around here, going to kill him on the f2 square. Right. So conclusion was bishop takes g3 was a mistake. Queen f3 was a losing move. Just chose continuation. But what should we have done here? Just take the bishop. It's unsound. What's black? Black's now piece down. No point checking on the back rank. Queens get exchanged. So maybe queen e4. Or the bishop. Check. In the corner. Check. As you can see, this is a much more survivable position. We're getting up on it like we're doing the other line. Actually suggest you check first. Going up. And hold our bishop. Now threatening to exchange the queen of the other queen back somewhere. It's a clever move. With Rook. Right, so that was a pretty spectacular sort of double blunder. Nice bishop sacrifice, unsound. Keres made the wrong response. I think I made the wrong response. Okay, cool. So I'm going to wrap it up there. I said I thought some quite interesting blunders, or more accurately, a lot of sort of little endgame intricacies to have a look at. And as I said, there's one more Geller-Benko, which I'll do a separate video on, which I was quite fascinated by. And you can see that so Petrosion won this standard and then won the World Chess Championship. And because of all the complaints from Fischer, this is the last one of these monstrous many players, many rounds, and they switch over to a match style candidates. So that certainly makes my job a lot easier, but it also makes it easier identifying which ones are important for the outcome of the matches, because it's just mano a mano. Good. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.